But the key thing, the really crucial part, is these tariffs hit immediately. Like April 2025, bam, no slow ramp up. The cost of bringing in solar equipment changed overnight.
Right. Which brings us to the core of it, the price changes. Let's start with solar panels, wholesale level. What happened there?
Well, it's interesting because even before April and late Q1 2025, we were already seeing a bit of an uptick. The market was kind of anticipating something on trade policy. The average module prices had crept up in December 24. But yeah, the April tariffs just threw gasoline on that fire.
Accelerated it.
Totally. And those new tariff costs, they've been pretty much fully baked into the wholesale prices now, especially for anything coming out of Asia.
Can you give us some specific examples, like manufacturer X saw prices jump by Y?
Sure. Let's take solar space. They're China-based. Their U.S. wholesale price went from maybe $0.22 a watt to almost 30 cents a watt, like 0.297.
Okay, so it's roughly
Around a 35% jump. Pretty much lines up perfectly with that 34% China tariff, right?
No.
Before that, back in March, you could get a container of their panels for maybe 21 cents a watt. Different world now.
And what about the Southeast Asian players? Some of them were offering really low prices before this.
Yeah, exactly. GS-Star, for instance, they manufacture in places like Thailand, Indonesia, Laos. They saw similar hikes, like 35%.
Right.
They used to have some crazy deals, like 360-watt panels for maybe $0.14 watt if you bought a whole container. Super cheap. But now, with Thailand at 36% tariff and Laos at 48%, well, their bulk prices are a bit higher. Still competitive, maybe, but that huge advantage, it's definitely shrunk.
Okay, so what about the big names, the tier one international guys everyone knows? Trina, Jinko, J Solar.
Yeah, for them, it kind of depended on where exactly their factories were, you know? Their supply chains mattered a lot.
Makes sense.
So Trina and J Solar, they use Vietnam and Thailand quite a bit. They were looking at potential cost bumps of maybe 7 to 9 cents a watt.
And Jinko. They have that U.S. factory too, right?
Exactly. So their panels from Malaysia, which got hit with a 24% tariff, those went up maybe from 25 cents pre-tariff to around 31 cents delivered.
Okay.
But their stuff made in Florida, tariff exempt. So they could keep selling those around the mid 30 cents per watt range without adding that tariff cost. Big advantage there.
Yeah, that's a huge differentiator. So does this mean the U.S.-based manufacturers are just cleaning up now? Q-Cells, First Solar?
Well, they definitely have an edge, no doubt. They aren't paying those import tariffs directly. Hanwha Q-Cells, First Solar, Mission Solar, Silfab.
Right.
But it's not like they just kept prices exactly the same while imports got way more expensive. We've seen some, let's say, modest price increases from them, or maybe they stopped offering discounts they used to give.
Okay, so less competitive pressure.
Exactly. So maybe a U.S.-made Tier 1 panel that was like 0.35 some watt early in the year is now closer to 0.38 cents. First Solar, though, they mostly do utility scale, and reports suggest they honored existing contract prices. New deals might be different.
Gotcha. You mentioned container loads versus pallets.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break down how the pricing changed for different volumes, maybe some before and after numbers?
Yeah, sure. So bigger volume, lower price per watt, that's standard, right? Container versus pallet. The tariffs hit both, though.
Okay.
So take solar space from China again. Container price went to around 30 cents per watt.
All right, that 35% jump.
Yep. GS-Star, coming from Thailand or Laos, their container prices were super low now. It's a 27 cents range.
Still a big jump.
Oh, yeah. Trina, coming out of Vietnam, 24 cents pre-tariff for a container, now estimated closer to 32 cents. And Canadian Solar's a good example because they make panels in Thailand and the U.S.
Right.
Their U.S.-made pallet price stayed around 30 cents a watt. But a pallet of their panels imported from Southeast Asia, estimated price jumped to maybe $0.37.
Well, we're really talking significant hikes across the board for import.
Absolutely. Like 20 to 40% increases aren't unusual for these tariffed imports. Think about it, a full container, maybe half a megawatt of panels. That could have been, say, $125,000 before April.
And now?
Now it's closer to $165,000. That's a big chunk of change.
Yeah.
Even pallet orders saw similar bumps in cents per watt, maybe an extra 6 to 10 cents.
Are there any exceptions?
Yeah.
Any ways around this?
Well, short term, yeah. If a distributor had inventory that landed before April, they could sell that at the old price until it ran out.
Okay, old stock.
Right. And then you have manufacturers in places with lower tariffs, like REC Group is in Singapore, they only face 10%, or potentially JA Solar's new factory in Arizona once it's running full tilt.
Right.
Where from India has a 27% tariff, maybe less impact for them in some segments.
But the main sources.
Yeah, the Chinese and Southeast Asian crystalline silicon stuff that dominates the market. Definitely more expensive now for U.S. buyers.
Okay, so panels clearly took a hit. What about inverters? Same story.
Pretty much, yeah. Inverter prices also went up, though maybe the impact varied a bit more depending on exactly where they were made.
Where do most inverters come from?
A lot from China still, but also Europe, Germany, Austria, Israel, Hungary, kind of all over.
Right.
So all imported inverters now face at least that 10% baseline tariff. But China's facing 34%, Europe 20%, South Korea 25%.
And what was the typical inverter cost before this?
Average hardware cost was maybe around $0.18, but with a pretty big range, like $0.20 depending on the type.
So what happened to those Chinese inverters, often the budget option?
Yeah, their prices climbed by roughly a third, pretty much tracking that 34% tariff.
Okay.
So an inverter that costs, say, $2.15 up might now be closer to $0.20. Or think of a 5 kilowatt string inverter. Maybe it was $1,000 before. Now it could be closer to $13, $20, $30 if it's from China.
And the European ones?
Yeah.
Like SMA?
Smaller increases there, reflecting that lower 20% EU tariff. So maybe an SMA that was $0.20 a watt went up to around $0.24.
What about microinverters, optimizers, that kind of thing?
Similar story if they're made in Asia. But interestingly, companies like Enphase, they make stuff in Mexico and India now, and SolarEdge, with production in Hungary, they've managed more stable pricing for the U.S. market. Diversification helped them avoid the worst of the China tariffs.
Ah, smart move.
Definitely. But despite those exceptions, we saw a general trend. B2B price lists for inverters went up maybe 5 to 10% across the board in April compared to late 2024. You can directly trace that back to the tariffs.
And that's hitting both pallet and container buyers proportionally.
Generally, yeah. And we're hearing it from installers on the ground, too. Like a Texas installer mentioned paying around $1,200 for a Chinese inverter they used to get for $900 just a month before.
Wow.
So maybe not as dramatic as panels overall, but still a noticeable hike. A few extra cents per watt on the inverter side adds up.
Okay, now let's talk batteries. Crucial for solar plus storage.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those are imported too.
Hmm.
How did the tariffs hit battery prices?
Okay, yeah, this is where things got really interesting, or painful, depending on your perspective.
Why is that?
Because a huge chunk of batteries, especially the LFP lithium iron phosphate type common in homes and businesses, comes from China and Southeast Asia.
Right.
And there was already a tariff on Chinese LFP batteries, a 7.5% Section 301 tariff, from previous trade disputes. That was already set to jump to 25% in 2026 anyway.
Okay, so there was existing pressure.
Exactly. Then these new reciprocal tariffs just piled on top.
So what's the total hit on Chinese batteries now?
Well, immediately in April 2025, they slapped on that extra 34% duty, so you add that to the 7.5%, and then factor in the planned 25%. By January 2026, you could be looking at an effective import duty of something like 82% on Chinese batteries.
82%.
Yeah, it's massive. The immediate effect this spring was that 34% jump. Some analysts were even saying this could basically double the price of Chinese battery packs in the near term.
Double. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
What about batteries from Southeast Asia? Did manufacturers try shifting assembly there to avoid the China tariffs?
They did. That was the strategy for a while. Move final assembly to Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, wherever.
But the new tariffs.
Exactly. The new tariffs slammed those countries, too. Vietnam, 46%, Thailand, 36%, Malaysia, 24%, Cambodia, 49%, Indonesia, 32%. It basically closed that loophole.
Huh.
So an LFP module from Vietnam that maybe cost $300 before, now it could easily be over $430 with that import tax.
And you're seeing this in actual prices.
Definitely. Distributor price lists for Q2 2025 showed residential battery units like 510 kilowatts jumping from around $400 per kilowatt or wholesale to $500 or even more.
Wow.
And even on big utility scale projects, we're hearing reports of quotes for turnkey battery systems going up 10-15% in places like California and Texas.
Are any battery suppliers less affected?
Well, the South Korean suppliers like LG Energy Solution, Samsung SDI, they face a 25% tariff. It's still an increase, obviously, but lower than China or Vietnam.
Okay.
Their products were often premium priced anyway, so maybe the relative hit feels a bit less dramatic. And then, of course, this makes U.S. domestic battery manufacturing look way more attractive.
Right, like Tesla.
Exactly. Tesla's Powerwall Megapack assembled domestically, so they dodge these import tariffs. And companies like Inverters or COP Power, who are building U.S. LFP factories, they stand to benefit hugely once they're up and running at scale.
So the trend of falling battery prices, that's over for now.
Pretty much stalled, yeah. Bloomberg NEF, they tracked this stuff closely. They were projecting a much smaller global price drop for batteries in 2025 than in previous years, partly because of these U.S. tariffs. It's a definite cost headwind for storage deployment, Make solar plus storage projects more expensive, no way around it.
Okay, so these price hikes are happening across panels, inverters, batteries.
Yeah.
Where in the U.S. is this impact felt the most? Which states are buying the most gear?
Yeah, the pain is definitely concentrated where the demand is highest. Think California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina.
Big solar states.
Exactly. Those 5 account for a massive slice of the U.S. solar pie, both existing installations and new stuff going in. California and Texas are way out front on new installs in 2025, and California especially is huge on battery storage now, too.
All right, NEM 3.0 driving that.
Precisely. And Florida and North Carolina have big utility programs. Arizona's got massive potential, plus growing storage needs. So, yeah, any cost increase hits hard in those markets.
And who are the main buyers feeling this pinch? The businesses actually purchasing the equipment.
You can break it down into a few groups. First, the big guys. Utility companies and IPPs, independent power producers.
Like NextEra, Duke.
Yep, NextEra in Florida, Duke in the Carolinas, SoCal Edison, PG&E in California, APS, SRP in Arizona. They buy in huge volumes, container loads, for their massive solar farms.
So for them, this impacts project economics.
Big time. It can affect their return on investment, maybe push up the prices they need in their power purchase agreements, their PPAs.
Okay.
Then you've got the EPC firms, the ones who engineer, procure, and construct the projects, and the really big installers. SOLV Energy, Mortenson, McCarthy, DEPCOM on the utility side, and then residential commercial giants like Sunrun, Tesla Energy, Freedom Solar, Vision Solar. They're sourcing gear for lots of projects, buying pallets, maybe containers, often through distributors. Many tried to lock in prices before April hit, but new quotes are definitely higher now.
And the distributors themselves, the middlemen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The CED Greentechs, Westcote Annixters, Soligens, Baywan REs of the world, they're crucial. They have warehouses in these key states, import containers, and sell smaller amounts to installers.
How would they react?
Well, their price list got updated pretty quick in Q2 2025. Most gave maybe a short grace period in March to clear out pre-tariff stock.
Right.
But the new prices reflect the tariffs. We heard one specific example from a California distributor. A pallet of Tier 1 panels went from about $6,600 in March to $8,700 in April, once the tariff stuff arrived.
Ouch. It's over $2,000 more per pallet.
Yeah. Similar stories from Texas, Florida. Some distributors even tried shifting inventory between states to help key customers short term, but that only goes so far.
Did buyers see this coming? Was there a rush beforehand?
Oh, yeah. A lot of the bigger buyers anticipated something was coming. There was definitely a procurement rush in the months leading up to April, trying to load up before the prices jumped.
Okay, so if we pull it all together, can we directly link these price jumps we're seeing back to those specific tariff percentages for each country?
I think we can, yeah. The connection seems pretty clear.
Maybe suppliers absorbed a tiny bit.
Could be. Or maybe just less room to increase. But it suggests Malaysian modules stayed relatively cheaper compared to China or Vietnam, Thailand after the tariffs. Still more expensive than before, but maybe the best deal among the imports.
And other places, EU, Korea, India.
Matches up too. European inverters optimizers saw around 20% bumps, matching the EU tariff. Korean shipments, maybe a 25% potential increase, though Q cells is shifting more to U.S. production anyway. And Waaree from India, with a 27% tariff, reportedly saw minimal impact, but maybe that's just their specific market position.
So the bottom line is the price increases track the tariffs pretty closely.
Oh, overwhelmingly, yes. It really looks like these tariffs are being largely passed through directly to the buyers in the U.S. market.
What are the absolute key takeaways from all this?
Well, I think the big picture is pretty stark. Since April 2025, we've seen really noticeable immediate price hikes for solar gear in the U.S. Panels up 20-40%, inverters maybe 10-30%, and batteries hit hard 30% plus.
Right.
This has especially squeezed those suppliers who relied heavily on low-cost Asian imports like GStar or SolarSpace. And that price gap between imported stuff and U.S.-made gear, it's definitely narrowed.
And this is hitting hardest in the big solar states.
Yep. California, Texas, Florida, etc. And the major buyers, utilities, EPCs, distributors, they're all adjusting, though many saw it coming and bought ahead short term.
So near-term impact is higher prices, maybe some project delays, tighter margins for installers.
That seems likely, yeah. But the industry's already responding, right? Looking harder at different supply chains, prioritizing domestic sourcing where they can, trying to maximize those IRA domestic content bonuses.
Yes.
And fundamentally, the data really shows that price hikes are closely tied to those tariff rates. The policy is definitely having the intended effect on import costs.
So thinking longer term, with these immediate pretty hefty price shifts. It does make you wonder, right? How does this ultimately affect the growth path, the accessibility of solar in the U.S., and what other changes, maybe policy responses, might we see down the road?
That's the big question now, isn't it? How does the market adapt from here? Definitely something to keep watching.
Absolutely.